Wednesday, where once a week we cover a particular topic that seems to be a hot button issue. Being that the Zaku changes are coming up and it's going to be going from evasion and involving some sort of damage reduction, I thought I'd go on ahead and talk about damage reduction in this particular Wiki Wednesday. So let me see, let me go on ahead and pull up the stream just to make sure I don't miss any comments just in case. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and get started. So when a hold on, give me 1 sec, y'all. 1 second. It's gonna be real hot in here, but we will get through this. Okay. So damage reduction. So when a player or enemy receives damage to their health or shields, that damage may be mitigated by sources of damage reduction, also called damage resistance. In other words, players may deal less damage than the listed arsenal value due to armor, damage type for modifiers from different health, armor, and shield classes, and or other sources of damage reduction. Lasagna. Note that in-game on the wiki, sometimes abilities and mod descriptions mention damage reduction when they really mean damage type modifier and vice versa. This distinction is needed to differentiate between multiplicative and additive stacking of damage reduction, okay? So how damage reduction affects damage. I'm just going to show you now that you can hover over your armor so you can actually see the reduction taking place on that, but I'm going to keep Shattered Shield here so you can see the damage reduction of 95%. So when a player is dealt damage, it is reduced by a scalar calculated from the amount of damage reduction, DR, active, and it could be for mods or abilities, etc. The general calculation takes a form of, for example, if a Grineer Lancer normally deals 100 IPS damage, impact, puncture, slash. Let's say it's like 50 impact, 25 puncture, 25 slash. So you have 100 IPS, right? And they do that against a player, and that damage is dealt to the player's shields, classified as Tenno Shield, which have an innate 25% damage reduction. The amount the player will take is going to be 75, because it's going to be the IPS, which is 100, each individually, but put those together, you get 100. And then it's going to be multiplied by 25%, which brings it, it's going to bring it down to 25. Just basically take a quarter off of it. If that damage is dealt to the player's health, which is classified as Tenno Flesh, with no modifiers, with 100 armor, classified as Tenno Armor, which is this guy right here, and no modifiers, and Gar's Splinter Storm is active, which has a 70% pure damage reduction. That's going to be unmodified, just so we can see that. Just want to make sure you guys can see that. It's going to be her too. So at a basis at 70, right? The amount the player will receive will then be 22.5. Now the equation behind this is, sorry about that, they get hit with 100 IPS, that goes down 70%, leaving it at 30, right? And then it goes down another like 3/3 or something like that. So it goes down another 3/4, sorry. So the equation is going to be under the damage reduction wiki if you wanted to look at it and run your own numbers, but that's basically it. So it takes all these mods and modifiers, and then it applies it to the damage after the damage has been presented. Then it takes that number and then reduces it. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Anyway, damage type modifiers. Now there's not a bunch of different types, but anyway, damage modifiers, or DM, not to be confused with damage reduction, DR, also play a role in damage calculations. Although the Tenno are neutral to all damage types as of update 27.2, mods such as toxic resistance or ability effects like Aviator add damage modifiers to a player's health and shields against either one type of damage specifically, which is toxin for toxin resistance, or all types at once. The generalized formula for the above can be modified to account for these as such. For example, if a previous player, I don't want to get into the damage, I'll do it anyway. For example, if the previous damage from above is dealt to a player's health, which is, they're talking about 100, they have 100 armor, and they have Splinter Storm, and they have Aerodynamic and Aviator, all equipped. The amount of damage the player receives will then be 8.1. Long story short. So it's the IPS minus the 2 damage modifiers plus Splinter Storm 70 plus the 3/4 reduction from the armor, right? And that brings it down to, or it's a 1/4 reduction, sorry about that, brings it down to 8.1. Out of 100, you go from 100 to 1. Now, in the case of armored enemies whose health and armor have innate damage modifiers, it's like radiation, corrosive, and blast, and things like that. The modified damage dealt is calculated as where health modifier is the damage modifier of the health, AM is the damage type modifier of the armor, PR is the pure damage reduction for like an ancient healer, or an AR is the amount of armor. Okay, so I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to go on ahead and recommend you guys take a peek at that equation because it's kind of complicated, so I don't really want to confuse anybody, especially if I type it. It still might make sense, but it might not. But anyway, for example, if the 100 pure slash damage is dealt to a heavy gunner with 500 ferrite armor, it has an innate modifier that brings down slash to 15%. That's going to bring it down to 85 right there. And then 300 clone flesh, which has plus 25%, so it ended up being 125 to the health, right? The amount of damage received will be, and then it goes through this long equation, and it ends up being 36.429. Now that's hitting with 100 slash, but it got reduced against the heavy gunner down to 36.429. Let's go ahead and jump into the types of damage reduction. So of course, as you guys know, we have the armor, right? Armor offers its own damage reduction, but it only accounts to health only. Damage reduction from armor is multiplicative with other types, okay? So and you have to consider, I was talking about it in my last stream, but how you have, let's say, adaptation, which is 90, and then you have shatter shield, which is 70. Whatever the remaining, so you have your 90, and then the remaining that's not reduced is 10%, right? Shatter shield is multiplicative, so it's going to add another, it's going to be 70% of the remainder, which is 10. That makes 7, so you have 97% there, right? What's the remainder? The remainder is 3. So with 3, the armor, so 3 being the remainder, is going to give you 33.3% of the remainder, which is 1. So it goes 90 plus 7 plus 1, 98% damage reduction. But that's only to armor because we're considering the armor. So if they hit health, Gara gets hit for 90, she gets hit for 2, whereas if she gets hit in the shields, then she gets hit for 3, if that makes any sense. Then you have pure damage reduction, which is shields and health. This is everywhere. This is things such as adaptation. This is also anytime you see it say damage reduction, that accounts for the shield as well. Armor is health only. Damage reduction is everything. Damage type modifiers, where applicable. Damage reduction from damage type modifiers is additive with the same type, 90% being the cap. This is things such as juggernauts. I have to pull this up to show you this part. So if you look, this guy right here, this lady, she gets bonus damage done to her from puncture and corrosive on the armor, but there's a reduction to slash and blast damage. There's also a reduction to the health with impact and gas damage, right? So that's the damage reduction that they're talking about there. And then of course they have quick thinking and gladiator finesse. These are at the cost of energy, but nonetheless it's still some type of multiplicative damage with other types. So if you have quick thinking and all this other stuff, you got a huge pool of health. That's going to reduce the amount of damage that you're taking as well, because quick thinking, if you get hit for 100 and you have a maxed out quick thinking, you're going to get hit for, like, if I'm not mistaken, you're going to get hit for, I want to say, I think it's like 2.4 or something like that. Like, it drastically reduces the amount of damage that you take. Let's check out some of these comments. So my Switch AC adapter broke. Not cool. So I'm using the dock and my phone charger until I get a new one. That's perfect. Text is pulling up. What's happening, Pablo? Snowy. Yellow. Guess who showed up yesterday, Snowy? Blunt. Yeah, I know, we 2 away. It's crazy, man. I don't know what to do. I do not know what to do, man. I'll figure something out for the YouTube community, man. Hey, that's 250, man. That's huge. Anyway, let's go into armor. Sorry. So armor. All right, armor is an attribute that reduces damage taken to health, but not to shields, okay? Not all enemies possess armor, as we know, some infested corpus, for example. Warframes, most bosses, and all Grineer do. but normal corpus and infested enemies do not have any, do not have any. For a given Warframe, its armor value can be found in the arsenal. Armored enemies have their base armor values listed in the codex, but the values increase when they spawn to higher levels. There's actually a thing on the wiki where you can drag the level as high as you want to like 9,009 or whatever, and it'll show you what their armor and health values are. So if you're like, I got something that hits for millions, then you can take those values, plug that into another website, which I'll have listed in the Discord soon, and you can see how much you actually have to hit the enemy for, really how much EHP you have to hit the enemy for. But that'll be more, I'll leave that in under tools and resources on the Discord. As far as the arsenal, let me go back to that. This is for our newer players. If you are new to this, you can hover over armor as I did before, and it'll show you the armor value right there. In combat, enemies with more than 1 point of armor have their health bars displayed yellow instead of red. Keep in mind, 1 point. It is possible to strip away armor value through certain abilities or damage procs. Well, not really damage procs anymore, but nonetheless. Or actually, yeah, one. Turning those enemies' health bars back to red. In the current design, sorry for today, I had a rough morning. In the current damage system, health bars always have a health class. Flesh, clone flesh, etc., which decrease or increase incoming damage depending on the damage type being inflicted, slash, etc. Armored entities have an additional class on their own called their armor class, either ferrite or alloy. There's also infested sinew, but that's basically alloy armor. That further decreases or increases incoming damage. This additional case is removed if the armor is stripped. Now they only mentioned 2. That third one I'm talking about, you'll find this in Deimos. This is things such as this guy, which is infested sinew. This is basically, let me pull it up. So an infested sinew is basically alloy armor. So I'm gonna pull up this guy and pull up this chick. So if you look at this one, it's weak against radiation, weak against cold, weak against puncture. If you look up this one, it's weak against radiation, weak against cold, weak against puncture. Alloy armor is resistant against magnetic. They are not. Alloy armor is also resistant against magnetic, electric, and slash. This one is only resistant to blast. But you treat them basically the exact same. Yes, a little different, but against infested armor, you're going to be taking radiation. If you're taking corrosive, it's simply to reduce the amount of armor that they have. But lo and behold, the actual amount that they're weak against it, the actual amount is you guys know what I'm saying. Hit them with radiation if you don't feel like dealing with armor. That's what I'm trying to say. All right, sorry, super rough morning. I apologize for this. This is going to be a long one, so go ahead and sit tight, guys, just to let you guys know. Blunt, yes, he showed up. Hi, Cypher. What's the key regarding the plus and minus? What's the difference between 1 plus and 2 pluses? Each plus equals 25%. There is a rare case where a plus will equal 15%, but 99% of the time, you can be confident that 1 plus is 25, 2 is 50, and 3 is 75%. That's how those work. And then the minuses are the same. The pluses mean that you deal extra damage to them. So if it has a plus, do that. If it has a minus, don't do that. That's basically what that means. So there you go. Pure damage reduction. All right, this is the one we all like, basically. So any source of damage reduction aside from armor will decrease damage done to health and shields. Sources of damage reduction include including armor, stacked multiplicatively with each other. This form of damage reduction is usually temporary or conditional, unlike armor. So it must be reapplied to receive less damage to health and shields. Sources of damage redirection, can essentially be treated as damage reduction. Redirection is basically like Trinity's third, where it redirects. Also Mesa's, hers redirects. So you get some weird additional damage reduction from that. That's what I was trying to explain when I was talking about Trinity's third, is it has this weird extra layer of damage reduction on her third. But I couldn't really explain. I still can't explain it without making sense, so bear with me. All I can do is read that sentence again. Sources of damage redirection can essentially be treated as damage reduction. Her third gives you 75% damage reduction and 75% redirection. So take it as you wish. Anyway, Baruch's tolerance for violence wanes as his hand is forced by his foes. Restraint is a resource used to used to Baruch that provides up to 50% damage resistance when the meter is completely depleted. Restraint meter is displayed in the lower right HUD on the corner, blah, blah, blah. Restraint meter. Let's go on ahead and pull Baruch up so I can go through this with you guys. And I appreciate you guys being patient with this. I'll read that comment in just a moment. Baruch. Cool. So, as you can see, he has a restraint meter. So, the restraint meter is displayed in the lower right HUD and is available and above all the icons. Restraint meter is initially filled. When gradually depletes, the following events occur throughout the mission. Each attack evaded through elude, which is the first ability, erodes 6% of the meter. Each enemy affected from lull erodes 8% of the meter. Each enemy disarmed by desolate hands erodes 1.6 of the meter. Damage resistance and erode amounts are not affected by mods. And Baruch's fourth ability, Serene Storm, utilizes restraint instead of energy to cast and maintain. Using this ability causes restraint meter to gradually refill until it's full and ability deactivated, blah, 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 blah. And then it goes through Baruch for whatever reason. Let's skip all the Serene Hand stuff. And it's still talking about Baruch. Still talking about Baruch. Okay, now it's talking about abilities. Alright, so it does list off all the abilities and kind of gives you some details into what those do, but all the damage reductions are effectively pure damage reduction, meaning that they reduce shields as well as your health. That's basically the TLDR of it. I'm going to grab Mesa because in my opinion she has the best damage reduction, being at 95. Well, next to Trinity, but that's argumentative. Damage type modifiers. Let's get into that. So damage type modifiers are unique classifications of damage reduction that is usually specific to only one type of damage. Damage modifiers stack additively with each other and multiplicatively with other sources of damage reduction. As such, damage type modifiers gained from mods is capped at 90. Okay, let me check out these comments real quick. So Pablo, can you quickly explain multiplicative damage in Warframe? Zaku Deny does 8,000 on my build, and the new change adds multiplicative damage based on the number of guns you take. My build is 10 guns, 8,000 damage. That if it's multiplicative in the way that it sounds, it's going to be a true 8 times damage. If it was additive, it would only add the base damage times that amount, but since it's multiplicative, it's going to take the number of guns and it's going to multiply your damage by that number. Right, so if you have 10 guns, you're going to be doing 80,000 damage. Whereas if it was additive, it would take your like base damage, whatever the base is. I know you're saying 8,000, but I'm positive that it's way lower than that. It would take that lower damage and multiply that times 8 and then add that, or multiply that times 10. You know what I mean? They're very similar, but multiplicative uses a multiplication sign rather than a plus sign. And in most cases with damage, a multiplication sign is much more beneficial than a plus sign. For example, I'll get into that. I'll get into that after this. Is the damage going to be boo-boo? No, I think it'll be okay. I don't think it'll be a nuker, but it'll be 8 times strong, 10 times stronger. 2200. Okay. Multi will multiply it. Yeah. Normally is for like current condition overload. Says current condition overload is additive. Sorry, 2200. Yeah, condition overload is additive, not multiplicative. Multiplicative usually it always comes out way stronger than you think. I'll get into that later. Sources of damage type modifiers. So you got Gauss, kinetic plating, and then it goes into all these sources. I don't want to waste you guys' time with that because there are too many of them. Such as tower resistance. Just to give you an example of what they're talking about like toxic resistance, which is damage from toxin, reduces toxin damage. You have arcanes that make you resistant to the procs that could do additional toxin damage. You have tower resistance, which is resistant to like sentient damage. And then you have quick thinking and gladiator finesse. Alright, so it goes through these. I'm going to try my best to kind of do these as fast as possible. But in a nutshell, if you have a maxed out quick thinking, it says the additional damage reduction is going to give you is 58.333%. And the multiplier on incoming damage is 0.41. Well, basically it's 58.333%. Gladiator Finesse gives you negative 66.67. That's an interesting number. Additional damage reduction. Obviously, quick thinking is going to be a million times better. So if you are going to use one of the two, use quick thinking. That's 240 versus 60%. They're talking about some special enemies such as the Chondrix and Eidolons, but I'm going to take a gander and say that these are basically the exact same. But let's go ahead and check them out. So Eidolons, Jugulis. Okay, let's see the Jugulis, that big guy with the, you know, the one shot. The Deimos Jugulis possesses damage reduction that scales depending on your weapon's DPS, excluding critical hits. DPS is calculated by critical hits are applied after DR damage reduction is calculated. Additionally, the average DPS is calculated using health modifiers and is quantized a graph that is available in the Deimos or Desmos calculator, blah blah. They have a link to it. For proc damage, critical hits are taken into account. So I guess slash, like crit slash, procs are taken into account. Where the proc damage is per tick, the damage of the corresponding proc, the health, shield, and armor modifiers taken into account. Note that, let me reread that. Where the proc damage is the per tick damage of the corresponding proc, with health, shield, and armor modifiers taken into account. Note that unlike the DPS controller for normal damage, the one for proc damage takes critical hits into account. For heat procs, the proc damage in the above formula is the accumulated value of all the previous heat procs, which is true. Let me see. Okay, now that I'm looking at Zaku, hold on, we're gonna have to get back to your Zaku in a moment. Demolishers and Demolists. Demolishers possess damage reduction that scales depending on your weapon's DPS, excluding critical hits. DPS is calculated. You know what? I thought about that. There is one that I think is going to be important for you guys to know, only because, you know, I preach this rat race thing all the time, and like the final boss of rat races is always the Juggernaut. So just so you guys know, the Juggernaut does have a innate 40% damage reduction. And it had something in here where it can get up to like 90%, but it does at a base have a 40% damage reduction on all incoming damage. I thought I'd just let you guys know that. Let's see, what is the next subject matter? And then it has some references, and I think that pretty much covers it. So TLDR for this, there are 3 different damage reductions. You have your standard armor, which is damage reduction only on health. You have pure damage reduction, as they call it, which is the damage reduction that we know, such as Shatter Shield. And then you have damage type modifiers, which is, you know, resistances that enemies will have, such as resistance to slash, you know, resistances to blast damage, things like that. And you have damage reduction through quick thinking and gladiator finesse, as you can get hit for a certain amount, but that amount is much less because it treats your energy as health, but it basically reduces the amount of damage by 240%, right? So there's those numbers, and I think in the next wiki, because this one's going to take a wiki on its own, and that's armor. I'm going to do a whole nother one on that because that's a whole different beast. But final piece that I want to make sure nobody's confused about is when they say damage reduction is multiplicative, okay, understand that if you have a 90% damage reduction plus another 90% damage reduction plus another 50% damage reduction, you're not going to have a 240% damage reduction or 230% damage reduction. You're going to have a 99.5% damage reduction. And I'll explain this last time. It's going to go from, you're going to have your 90% reduced, leaving you with 10%. Then you're going to have 90% of that being reduced, leaving you with 1%. Then you're going to have 50% of that being reduced, which is 50%, 99.5. Right? All right, cool. So a little bit longer and kind of chaotic, more chaotic than my usual Warframe Wiki Wednesdays, but I appreciate you guys for being here. Let me go ahead and check out some of these comments, and then we'll call it a wrap. So let me see. So first things first, let me get back to this. So is damage going to be boo-boo steel or nuker? I know it's hard to tell since the patch isn't here, but just like asking based on your current knowledge and how the game handles multiplicative damage. I think it's going to be significant, but we won't really know for sure until we see it. Now, I saw a post in the forums saying that the void damage scales. I'm telling you, it does not. Okay, it does not scale. They can say it scales all they want to. I'm going to tell you like this: if it scaled, it should be killing level 155s without a problem, but it doesn't. So the conclusion is it doesn't scale. Let me see. Normally for like current condition overload, let's say you have 1,000 damage and one proc, say it might be 120, it'll be two. Well, yeah, if you hit for 1,000, it's gonna add 1,200. Yeah, you're correct, Bargoff. Okay, now that I'm looking at Zaku, 10 guns deny 8,200 damage, and his four debuffs NPCs, that would be 50% vulnerability to void. So Zaku might not be lost yet. More than likely not. You know, it might not be lost. I think Zaku's going to have some promising things happening come this update. And I can't wait for the update. Alright, let me tell you something. That was Bargov. Did you already hit how armor adds to quick thinking efficiently? The armor, so the way quick thinking works is if I have, okay, so once you find out, oops, sorry. I'll just leave the mic out. So let me make sure you guys can hear me so I can explain this. Testing 1, 2. All right, perfect. So the way quick thinking works is quick thinking will calculate after everything has already been calculated, right? So if you're already down to a 99% damage reduction, right? You got adaptation plus, I don't know, Gara or something, right? Look at your energy pool as another health pool. It's another health pool. So I have 405 health, and then I have 531 health at the bottom, right? So if you take the damage reduction that you have, if I get hit for 1,000, I got a 99% damage reduction, I'm gonna get hit for 100, right? Now, if I have a 250% efficiency or 240% efficiency, the way I would like to position this to you is if you're like, let's say armor. Let's say your armor gave you a 50% damage reduction. So you get hit for 1,000, and now you have, you know, the 50% damage reduction. That's going to apply on top of quick thinking. So let's say 5 times 25. What's that? I don't know. 125. So I have 1,200. No, I have 2,500 health down there, right? 2,500 health. They hit me for 1,000, right? But I'm only going to get hit for 500. If that makes any sense. Then we have to scale that down. So now I'm hit for 500. Then we're gonna reduce it back down to the 531 that you're looking at, which is divided by 5. So I'm only going to get hit for 20, just because of armor. Does that make sense? I just had to do that way of math so it makes sense. Right? I had to beef it up to the 250. Then they hit me for 1,000. Right? But the armor is reducing it to 500. So instead of 1,000, I got hit for 500. Right? Then we have to take that 2,500 and reduce that down, divided by 5 now, to get back to our 531. But if I'm doing that, I have to take that 500 they hit me for, and I have to reduce that down by 5 also. So I apologize. I'm going to get hit for 100 or something like that. You know what I mean? Because 1,000 is almost a third of the bar, but it's not going to hit a third of my bar. It's only going to hit a fifth of my bar, because 500 is a fifth of 2,500. And so it's only going to hit for a fifth of my EHP that I'm getting from quick thinking. So armor does affect all your damage reduction stacks on top of. Matter of fact, let me say it this way: quick thinking stacks on top of all of your other damage reduction modifiers. That's why I use quick thinking, because it gives you a ass load of EHP as a backup. It's like an energy tank from Super Metroid. So if you die, you have this energy tank as a backup, and it's going to use your energy, but you are a health backup. You know what I'm talking about. You have a health tank. You know what I'm saying? Sorry about that. Let's see. Old CO. Yes, the old CO was super. No, the old CO was busted. Would this be base? I'm gonna have to do it. Actually, I have a CO. I think I have a condition overload Wiki Wednesday. I would recommend checking that one out. Also, multiplicative is after all bonuses, whereas additive is not. Okay, so here's how multiplicative works for situations like that. So you have to think of a math problem, right? This is multiplicative, right? So if you can have 100. Oops. This is CO, right? This is old CO. Let's say 60, right? Let's say current CO. So you got 120 plus 120 plus 120 plus 120 plus 120. All right, that's 5 procs. Right, that puts you at 600 additional damage. The way CO used to work was it was 120 times 120 times 120 times 120 times 120. That's the old CO. Now, it wasn't as busted because it was only 60, but it's still in one proc. It was half. It was in two procs basically. It was at 360, right? 360 times 60 is clearly in the thousands, and then it gets stronger, and then it gets stronger. Now, the thing about it is the old CO only had 3, right? Because there's no reason to go higher than that. So if we do that math in a calculator, whatever that equation is basically 60 to the power. That's the old CO. CO was 60 to the power of the number of procs at a cap of 3. That was the old CO. And it would hit like 3,000 extra damage or something. Like way the fuck up there. Let me pull this up real quick. So 60 times 60 times 60. So you were getting an extra 216,000 damage on 3 procs. Which sounds busted as hell, right? It didn't like multiply exactly like that, but that's how it did though. But it didn't do it like, actually I take that back. That's not how it worked, I'm sorry. What it used to do is this, I'm sorry. It would apply the 60 damage, right? To your damage, and then it would spit out a number, right? Now what it used to do is it used to take that bigger number and then multiply that times the 60%, right? And then it would add the 60% to it, right? Then it would spit out a new number. And then it would take that bigger number and then it would take that bigger number and make that times 60. You see what I'm saying? It wasn't based on the base damage. So if you got, let's say 1,000 damage and you ended up with now 1,600. So let's say you got 1,000 damage, right? And now you have 1,600 damage because of the 60%. Now the next proc is going to take 1,600 damage and it's going to consider that. Not to mention this applied on top of Blood Rush. Right? So if you had a Blood Rush multiplier and then this, it's always considering the last number produced, not the base number. Which is what made Condition Overload so busted. Also, it used to stack with damage mods. So you would have Prime Pressure Point, which is 165, right? That puts you at 1650. By the time you got to the next Condition Overload proc, it's whatever that is times whatever. We'll say, I don't know, let's say 2,300, right? It's going to take 2,300 and it's going to do on top of that. And let's say you had Spoiled Strike in there. I mean, that's what Condition Overload used to do. That's multiplicative. It's multiplying off the last number produced with a multiplication sign. Additive, what additive does, because you can only really do additive off of base numbers. You can get a number from the calculated damage, but multiplying, you're usually going to see. I mean, it's kind of hard to. It's not really hard to explain. I'm just trying to explain. It's really just this versus this. That's really all it is. So let's take your Zaku situation. You have let's just say 8,000. You got 8,000 damage. Sorry for anybody who's watched the wiki. We're not talking about damage reduction anymore. I just wanted to cover this before I let it go. But I want to make sure this is understood. So if you have this and you have 10 guns, what the Zaku equation is actually going to look like, it's actually going to be, your 10 guns. It's going to be 1 plus your 10 guns, right? And then it's going to spit out a number. That's what's actually going to happen. So you're going to be doing like 80, what is it? You're going to be doing like 88,000 damage or something like that. That's the actual, because it's doing your guns plus one more. So that shot will do 88,000 damage from deny. If that's what you're talking about. If you're talking about the guns themselves, to my understanding, are going to be additive. The guns are additive because it's one gun plus another gun plus another gun plus another gun, right? If it was additive, I think in this case it technically would work out the same if it was additive or multiplicative, regardless of which way it went. It would still end up at 88,000, whether they said it. For this specific example, it would end up at the same number. The only time that would change is if you had like roar or something on her, then additive would be less than multiplicative, because you'll have your, let's say you'll have your 50, right? You have your 50 plus your 8,000. Well, your 50% would be times, so you'd have that times the 8,000. That would produce a result. Then it would take that number, and it would basically treat it the same way condition overload did. But that would be your buffs. You would have to have a bunch of different modifiers in here. And then what would happen is it would take that. It would either take that number, and it depends on when roar is calculating. Now I think about it, I think roar will calculate after the fact. So you'd have 8,000 times your 1 plus 10, and that would produce a number, right? That's your additive or multiplicative number. Multiplicative is when you're looking at times 50 times 50%, right? Multiplicative is when you're doing basically like this. This is really hard to explain, but multiplicative looks like this. Like if you look at wikis, multiplicative looks like that, and additive looks like this. That's probably the more accurate way to describe it. That's probably the easiest way I can describe it. Multiplicative adds a plus one in there. It's basically like this. Let's do that. I think that'll make a little bit more sense to you. I'm sorry about that. So this is multiplicative. This is additive. Does that make sense? I mean, there's so many different equations to look at, because CO is a different one too. But that's basically the difference. If you go and look at all the equations on the wiki, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Alright, so I hope that helps you guys. So I guess to give you the equation for it, it would basically be your 8,000, and then it would be times, and then because it's multiplicative, it would be that equals, and then that's your damage. That's your damage result. And then if you had any additional buffs, it would be that. And then if you had a additive buff, it would be whatever the buff was. And if you had a multiplicative buff, like let me put it this way, if you had what is it? If you had who is that? If you had like smite and fusion would be like smite, right? But if you had roar, you would have 1 plus roar. You see what I'm saying? Because roar, when it adds 50%, in actuality it's adding 150%. If you have a 300 power strength rhino, it says it's adding 150%, you're actually adding 250%. You're actually making, the result is 250% damage. If you have a 200 strength rhino, it says 100% damage, you're spitting out 200% damage. If you have 100% if you have 100% smite and fusion, it's spitting out 100% radiation, not 200%. Does that make sense? That's probably the easiest way I can think of explaining it without getting it too crazy. That's why I'm like, you have multipliers and you have bullshit multipliers. Like an actual multiplier throws the +1 in there. A bullshit multiplier gives you the percentage. So if you have, oh, I'm getting an extra 100% damage. Like, that's not an extra 100% damage. It's just adding, it's just 100% of the damage you're spitting out. Whereas if you got an extra 100% damage, it's doing that. That's an extra 100% of the damage. Because instead of being 8,000, right? Now it's 16,000. You got an extra 8,000. That's where the +1 comes in. Because it's taking the 1 is because it's considering the original number. That's where the 1 comes in. But if you don't consider the 1, then it's modifying the number without adding the original number into the equation. But that's probably the best way I can explain multiplicative. So when they say multiplicative, you have 10 guns, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about that. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Clan chat be vibing. I hope so. Will you have also come to change sign to plus? Change sign to plus. Oh yeah, I think I did that. GG mission complete. Well, no, it wouldn't do 8,000 plus because the modifier is the number of guns, and it wouldn't be 8,000 plus 1%. It'd be a percentage, right? Because this number is dependent on how many guns they have. So at some point, this number is going to multiply with something over here. Now, the number spit out over here is going to be different. Now, the only other way I can think that they're saying multiplicative damage is if they're doing something insane, like this or some shit like this. Like if they're doing like 1 plus 1 to the power of 10. If they're doing something like that, that's a true multiplicative multiplier, but that is not gonna happen. I promise you that. Because that right there is gonna spit out like a negative crit. Easy. Like per shot would be a negative crit. They're not gonna do that. You see what I'm saying? That thing, your second would one-shot everything with no buffs. That's not gonna happen. Because that's 2 to the power of 10, which is like 2 with hella zeros. Like it's like 2, I think, I don't know how many zeros that is, but that's shit, man. 2 times 10 is 20. Well, it looked like this, sorry. It looked like that, sorry. 2 times 10 is 2 times 2 is 4 times blah blah blah. I don't know. It'll spit some radically, drastically large number out though. So I doubt they're gonna do that. It'd be way too big because this is in the thousands. So whatever number comes out of this is gonna have 3 zeros behind it times 8. That's a big ass number. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. We just gotta wait and see. So 20 billion? I don't know. I mean, if it's 20 billion, it's 20 billion. Huh, mission complete, Captain. Hiya! Hiya! I saw all the episodes. It was amazing. Anyway, so that's so I hope you guys appreciated this episode. You know, if the end of it was a bonus for you, you know, I hope it was. But yeah, all the equations that you're gonna need are on the wiki, and they sometimes can seem kind of confusing. Just be sure to use your PEMDAS. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, and you should be okay. Or what is it? Pink elephants must dance and sing, whichever one you use. But anyways, this is CS with DWP. If you like the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will be hollering at you, pimps, players, and hustlers in the next piece of content. All right, you guys, peace. Woo! Hiya!